in those fears are coming out in what they say or don't say. And the reality is we all have them.
Welcome to this episode of Confluence, where we explore communication at the boundary of language and culture. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Amy Forehand to the show. Welcome,
Thank
Amy.
you. It's good to be here.
Amy and I met pretty recently, and I was so impressed with her bio and our conversation that I immediately wanted to know more. So I invited her to be on the show. Amy is the founder of the Forehand Company, where she focuses on creating stronger partnerships between employees and their leaders. This is a process of developing something she calls employeeship. Amy has a diverse background with over 20 years in engineering, operations, and human resources. Her practice is guided by knowing from experience that employees and companies thrive when the right environment is created. So, Amy, we're going to have a great conversation today. I'm really excited to dive in. The first question I ask all of my guests is to just share a little bit about yourself, your background, and a bit about who you are.
Yeah. So, I am, first of all, this morning I started out in mom mode. So I am a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm also a consultant and a coach, and I am also a Michigander. And my background has brought me, I tell people, up and down my career, up and down 94, or back and forth down 94 from one coast to the other. And you mentioned, I've got a diverse background. My entry into the space that I work in actually started in manufacturing when I graduated from college with a chemical engineering degree, worked in manufacturing for a while, and then moved to the nuclear industry. And I had a textbook chemical engineering job, but I also quickly fell into some leadership development work, performance management work, helping to reduce the likelihood of errors in the nuclear industry. And that was really where my my love of it's an important thing in nuclear, airlines, and medical, and we like all those people to be very safe and precise in their actions. And it was during that time that I developed a love for why do organizations perform the way they do, what really gets to the core of being able to have people perform at their very best, and how does leadership play a role. So that was my foray into human resources, where I worked for about 15 years in human resources function, and then came out and started doing this on my own.
Was that experience in the human resources, did that start also in the nuclear industry?
A little bit. So when I worked in that industry, I did work in some training organizations, and the work that I was doing was very much like organizational development, organizational effectiveness work. In that industry, though, it tends to be in continuous improvement functions versus HR. And but that I recognized that what I was doing was actually in HR field. So I went and got some business education, and got my MBA focused on strategy and organizational management, and then made the career shift at that point.
I'm happy to know that in the nuclear industry, they care about stuff like that, about the HR side and about the organizational culture and those kinds of things. I also find it really fascinating that you are an HR professional now, but your background is engineering. Because so many of the people I end up working with to help them develop are engineers or other tech kinds of people. And I think you probably have a lot of empathy for the types of struggles they have, possibly. Is that true?
It is nice to have those different perspectives, both having worked in some operational roles, working it with more technical. I've also done some IT implementations. So, some working with IT teams, working with engineering teams, and understanding the difference in approaches to how people work and engage in some of those subcultures of those disciplines has been helpful for
Right.
me.
Yeah, for sure. I can see where that would really be the case. One of the reasons I was so fascinated to have a conversation with you is because the work I do is developmental. And I hadn't always thought of it that way. I'm a coach, I specialize in communication skills, but I didn't really think about I know who my clients are, but how do they fit into that organization? And at what stages and points of their evolution in their careers does the type of development I do become
Right.
important? So that's why I find this whole conversation about developing people and it's that role in the organization. I find it super fascinating. So why don't you start out by just giving us your definition of what development
Yeah.
is?
So to me, development is, well, I'll start with what it's not. How's that?
Okay,
A lot
that's
of
fine.
times, I would have conversations with people when I was in that talent management space. I had responsibility for performance management programs and our, development planning process. And so I would go and look at what's on people's development plans, how are they approaching what they need to work on, and and a lot of times people would say, oh, my, and even now, when I get people who call me as a client, they say, oh, we need development, we need training. And, training is, and I worked in a training organization, in a learning development organization, and I've written competency models. Training is necessary, but it's a very specific need. And development and
Mm.
training are not the same thing. Training is an activity within development. And so to me, development is it's a process, and it's a process that occurs over time, and it's the process of the activities that you do, and attaching those activities that you are doing to learn and expand your thinking to the goals that you have. And those goals could be life goals, those goals could be your career goals, those goals could be very task specific, but you have to align the learning and the activities that you decide to do to the goal that you're trying to achieve.
I think what's interesting about what you just said is this whole thing about it takes time. And I'm glad you said that. I hope that's a realization in organizations because I think you're right. I was a member of the ATD, which is the Association of Talent Development now, but it used to be training and development. And so much emphasis gets put on that training
Yes.
piece. It's like the design of it and what are the outcomes. But I think in that focus, people lose track of, like you said, that evolution of the person and making things stick. In certainly in the work I do, I'm working in behavior change, and it definitely
Yes.
takes time. So what is it in this development process? Maybe like what do you look for, or how do you know that this employee really is developing?
So one of the things I look for, if I'm able to have a conversation with them, is I listen to the language that they use about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what their goals are. And if they're not able to articulate any of those things, that's kind of a red flag. So I use myself as an example. I'm relatively new in running my own business, and there are things that I am having to develop just in order to be able to get this off the ground and manage my business. And some of them I didn't even realize I would have to. One of them I had a somebody call me and she said, "Hey, uh, I saw you started your own business. You're going to be a speaker. Why don't you come to our National Speaker Association Michigan chapter meeting?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a consultant. I'm not a speaker." She said, "No, no, no, no. You're going to be a speaker." And so, I didn't at that point. I didn't know what I needed to do. And so it was like, and I didn't listen to the feedback. A couple months later, she called me and she said, "I know you didn't come to the last one, but you're going to be a speaker. You need to come and see us." I said, "No, no, no. I'm going to be a consultant." Well, if you run a business and you're a solopreneur and you are selling services, you need to talk about it. You need to do what you and I are doing, right? People need to know who we are,
Right.
how we approach things, how we think about things. And so she was right. So I understood, okay, what? I need to be a speaker. And and then it was also she knew why, but I didn't understand why. And so now I understand the why. And
Hmm.
there's a couple of whys for me. One is I've got this idea of employeeship. So that is something that a lot of people aren't aware of, and I'd like to influence thinking around it. So my why is to be better at influencing new discussions around employeeship. Another why is so I can have conversations with you and not have it be painful for anybody, right? And then
So you
yeah, and
go ahead.
and then the what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And what is your goal? And the goal, I talked about some of those goals, but the goal is also to run a successful business. So I was able to align those development requirements with the actions that I took. So I went through a year and a half long training journey with this organization and worked on my speaker skills, and I continue to practice them. And that's the other thing I look for in development is, are they taking the learning opportunities, what they're trying to do, and continuously improving it, practicing it. And like you said, it's about behavior change, right? Any skill we
Yeah.
learn involves some sort of practiced behavior. So if I don't spend time preparing and practicing and being deliberate and thoughtful about how I'm going to get incrementally better, just like anybody would in a sport or a hobby, I'm not going to get that process of development happening. So when I look at development programs or I look at development plans or I talk to people, I look for those different pieces of the process to make sure that it's
Yeah.
happening.
I think that's so interesting because obviously now you have developed your speaker skills, so you have seen development
Mhm.
in yourself. You know that you're not at the same place you were
Right.
when you started the development. And I have to be honest, it's one of the things I most struggle with my clients is the stickiness of it. I can teach them a lot of things like how to be more concise or how to better organize their presentations so that they, get their point across more quickly. But I find that it's that
Hmm.
practice piece and staying mindful and conscious that I find tough to get them
Yeah.
to do because they're busy people. They've got these busy jobs, and sometimes I feel like it just gets lost in the shuffle. So maybe it's that
Hmm.
checking back, and probably as a boss, you have maybe more opportunity to check in. If a company's investing in a development plan, I would assume somebody's interested in seeing that it happens, right? So what's that
Yeah.
process?
So that's another, good point about sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I had one of the programs that I had oversight of was looking at the what we termed, our high potential kind of fast tracked leadership development and looking at those plans. And when I dove into it, and this was the group of leaders that we were putting a lot of investment into. And when I went in and kind of audited the development journeys and the development plans, we were setting up mentors, we had next level sponsors and leadership, we had courses that we paid and sent them to or developed internally. And when I went back and talked to the leaders, I talked to the mentors, I talked to the people and said, okay, for this individual, here's their development goals. What are you guys doing to work on it? Oh, well, we gave them this job assignment. Okay. But that's part of it, giving them the experience. But if they don't know why they're in that experience, they don't have somebody checking in. They don't have somebody coaching them and mentoring them specific for that purpose, or mentors and employees weren't meeting. They're like, oh, I have a mentor, but I haven't talked to him in 9 months. Well, then you don't have a mentor, And so
Right.
one of the things that we did was we just got really clear about whose responsibility was whose in that development
Yeah.
process, and really clear about what were the things that they needed to do in order to achieve their development. So some of the stuff you and I just talked about, being really explicit. You have this mentor to work on
Hmm.
your communication skills. What particular communication skills are we talking about? Right? Because that is
Right.
huge. And if you're too generic,
Oh,
it
for sure.
doesn't work. And then putting the person who is being developed or pursuing development in charge of and accountable for making that development happen. And that's one of the things with employeeship too, that I think there's a lot of power in it, is helping people understand how to identify the skills and relationships I need to be successful, and how do I drive that myself. Because a lot of
Right.
people, the data says, well, I'm not being developed, so I'm going to leave or go somewhere else. And
It impacts
yeah,
retention. Yep.
and part of it is you need to own that development and have a partner with you who's going to check in and
Yep.
have some
Yep.
shared, because it does sometimes you do get busy, and if someone's going to call and ask you and say how's that going, you're going to be more accountable to it. It's
Right.
just, as humans, if we have to talk to somebody else about it, we're going to be a little more motivated to make sure we're doing it, and that somebody cares, and is invested
Well,
in you.
yeah, and I think that's so important. I mean, I'm just thinking about my client, one particular client right now, and how useful it would be if she had someone in the company who she knew was watching her when she gave
Hmm.
presentations, because I can't be there all
Yeah.
the time. I'm not in the company. However, she needs that
Yeah.
feedback. She needs feedback from people in the environment. So I'm thinking, wow, maybe I should make that a requirement of my program, that they find an internal mentor who is going to hold them
Hmm.
accountable and stay with it. What she's in purchasing, and the global supply chain has just gone crazy recently for obvious reasons, and she's lost focus on her communication because she's putting out
Right.
so many fires. But if there were someone in the organization who was saying, "Oh, by the way," pulling
Yeah.
her back in a
Yeah.
way, I've tried to do it, but I think that's such an important component of that development journey, and making that person
Yeah.
responsible. Would you like to say a little more about employeeship? I'd love to know more about what
Yeah.
you mean by
So
that.
employeeship is, it's the initiative, responsibility, and the loyalty that a person, as an employee, you're in the state of being an employee, so it's employeeship, and it's the level of initiative, loyalty, and responsibility that you have in that role
I
or
see.
that position. And
So it's like
mhm,
leadership. It's employeeship versus
yes,
leadership,
yes.
right?
And
Okay,
part of the
got it.
reason that I landed on that was I actually heard somebody say, we want all our employees to be leaders. And this was an executive of a company that has like 150,000 people across the world. And I lost it. I said, are you kidding? Like if 150,000 people walked into work tomorrow and were like, I'm the leader today, it would be chaos, right? You need good, and this is where I
Right.
got employeeship from. I'm like, you need good followers, you need followership, you need great employees, you need employeeship. And I was so excited. I thought I invented a word, and I was
You
driving
coined
at
a
the
term.
time, so I ended up, when I got to my destination, I Googled it, and actually in Sweden and some of the European countries, employeeship has been something that they've really promoted for about 25 years. And, when we look at the outcomes in Sweden, they've got fantastically run companies. They have, some of the highest engagement in the world, and it's because they support and develop the skills and relationships that people need in order to boost that responsibility, initiative, and loyalty in their roles and to their companies.
Leave
I
it to the
know.
Swedes, I'll tell you. They're the first also with
Yeah.
work-life balance and a lot of these human
Yes.
concepts that we have to teach people
Yes.
about in the U.S. because they don't come
Yeah.
so
I
naturally,
know.
right? Um, so when you have a client, what process do you use with them to help them maybe develop a development
Hmm.
process within their
Yeah.
organization?
So, one of the things that, and this is where I think having that organizational view helps too, from an organizational
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, there is a process that Peterson actually published several years ago in the early 2000s, I believe it was. And it's actually from an article he wrote about executive coaching, but it talks about this development pipeline. And in order for development to occur, that people need to go through this development pipeline, and you have to go through each stage of the pipeline. And I liked this because, it's like back in a plant for me with all of my water in my pipes. But the first thing, and there's 6 steps that people have to take, and you can't skip any of the steps. And several of them we've talked about already. Like the first one is you have to have a really strong partnership with somebody to be able to trust their feedback, get their insights. So the example that you gave, that not having that partnership, I mean, she has it with you, but not having it in the place where she's practicing and somebody supporting her, from her career goals internal to her company, that would be like, you
Right.
think of that as like a bottleneck in the pipeline. So you need to open up that bottleneck before you can go on to the next stage. So that will limit her
I see.
ability in not having that partnership.
To really
Hmm.
develop.
And
Okay, cool. So is that one
yep,
first part
yep.
of the
So that's the
pipeline?
first part.
Okay.
And that goes back to your question too about what roles do managers play? They're the very first
Right.
part.
Right.
Invest, partner with those employees and be there with them, know what they're
Invest.
working on, and support them in doing it. The second piece is insight. So you need to have that, and you said it too, somebody that is going to give you that really great feedback. And that could be,
Mhm.
a coach by observation, it could be 360 feedback. There's lots of ways to get it. And then once you have,
And probably lots of different
mhm,
kinds, right? Like I give feedback from a communication specialist perspective, but she should also have feedback from
right,
other
right.
perspectives,
And
right?
then you take all of that and kind of step back and say, what do I need? And
Right.
what is it? The Jahari, is it Jahari's window? Yeah,
Johari
is
window.
a good
Yeah.
model to
Yeah.
think about that insight. What do you know about yourself? What do others
Yep.
know? Um, what do both groups
What
know?
do others know that
Mhm.
you don't know?
Right.
And what does nobody
Right.
know?
And that's a great way to map out, where am I at? Where do I need more insight? How do I open up this window of what I know
Yeah.
and what others know?
And see, you have to figure out a way to
Yep.
see your blind spots because I've always found that the most
Yes.
challenging,
Yeah.
obviously.
So 2, you have your insight. Now you can move on to 3. And this one actually this comes from self. You can't have other people do it for you, and that's motivation. You have to want to achieve that. And again, I'm not a huge fan of sports analogies, but sports and hobbies, anything that you really enjoy and you practice at and you work at, you've got some sort of internal fire or some reason, or maybe it's just really giving yourself to a charity or something you do. you know as an individual developing, you need to know what are the things that are going to motivate you and incent you. And that's where your why and your goal come in and are important. Understanding why you want to do this and what is the goal you're attaching it to can help with those motivation pieces.
And that's sort of like when the going gets tough, it's what
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
keeps you
brings you
doing
back
it.
to why
Yeah.
am I even doing this? Yeah. And
For
then,
sure. Yeah.
is the piece that is the capabilities, and that is really what we have maybe traditionally thought about development, right? Like the skill build out, the way in which you're going to achieve that skill development. Are you going?
So that's kind of where
Mm-hmm.
training comes
Yeah, that's
into
one.
it in the
Right,
fourth stage.
right. And a lot of
Okay.
people just they jump into that, right? We've got this issue.
Right. Without
You
first
aren't aware
learning.
of it. I haven't talked to you, but I'm going to give you training. And so you've skipped the
Go.
first 3 steps of this pipeline, and then companies get frustrated, or leaders get frustrated, or people get frustrated where they went to training, why aren't they using it? And
Right. Right. And they don't. It's probably a big part of that is they don't know
yeah,
their why.
yeah.
They they don't have the
Right,
goal in the why.
right.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it, if you don't have those, but then the next piece, the 5th one, is real world practice. If you do not
Oh.
immediately go start practicing it and have something to attach that learning to, you're going to lose it. And
Yep.
within
Yep. It's like taking the show on the road,
Right,
right?
right. And so that's the other thing is like organizations will have these large, what they call training initiatives to develop a competency or a skill for the entire company. Well, anybody who is in that session and doesn't understand why they're there or how they are supposed to apply it, you're not going to get the ROI on it. And so
It's just
it
wasted.
is. It is.
Yeah.
And there are things that are good to do on that broad level, but that's probably more insight and partnership and awareness building than actual skill development. And there's a space for that.
Right.
But that's not
Right.
going to build out the capability. The capability will then be built out by allowing that time to practice. And then the very last piece is accountability, which is, I sometimes shy away from the word accountability because it gets negative connotation, but it's really that feedback, that reflection, that am I progressing and where else do I need to go?
Yeah, encouraging someone to acknowledge that yes, in fact, you have developed. That somebody needs to help that person understand when they've accomplished the
Right.
goal, and it probably is an internal awareness. I know that, like with my clients, it's about language and communicating more effectively. I think they do start to see a different result, but somebody needs to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge it. Maybe you don't get a
Right.
certificate, but some like my client did give a presentation to her boss after the first 3 months we worked together. And her boss did say, wow, that's the clearest presentation I've ever heard you give. So she got that positive reinforcement. It was kind of early because I think was still more to do and still more time to spend in the
Yeah.
process. But she did get at least that positive feedback from her boss, who
Yeah.
noticed a difference.
Yeah. And that helps with that internal
And she
motivation piece too. Like, this is worth what I'm doing.
And she wants people to notice. We are still working together. And we kind of level set the other day because of the chaos she's been dealing with. And I said, so what is it that you want now? Right? Think about this goal in a new way. And she said, I want to be more clear and concise, and I want people to
Yeah.
notice it. So if she's very clear, She's very clear
Yeah.
about that.
It's interesting as you're talking about this. One other thing that I've worked with some leaders recently on is this notion of fears and meeting
Mm,
different esteem needs. And, each of us have these different esteem needs, and some of our fears. It, come out of not having those needs met. So there's four primary
oh,
ones that I talk to the group about, and one is um, achieve achievement, um, which the esteem need or the fear is failure. One is recognition, and the fear is process isn't going to work. Things are going to be chaos for control, and then power is you're not seen in high regard. Recognition
mm,
is not being like socially accepted. So the
I see.
one of
Okay.
the things that I found is sometimes the higher in leadership and the higher somebody is in terms of performance and um, that some of those needs are coming out in those fears are coming out in what they say or don't say. And the reality
I
is we
see.
all have them. And
Mm.
we have all four of
Oh, for
them.
sure.
And so what I work with leaders to do is encourage them to uh, say, this is the fear I have. I mean, I don't suggest everybody go and do that, but in a controlled way, we do it. And this is how it's impacting me. And a lot of times, by sharing that vulnerability, where, so for your client, sharing that vulnerability where I'm working really hard to be clear and concise, give I appreciate any feedback. I've been working on this because we all have things we're working on. We all have skills
Oh,
we're
yeah, for
developing.
sure.
And when we go and allow people work past that fear, whatever yours
Hmm.
is, and be open and say, I'm working on this, it's a work in progress, and I need your feedback. Most people love to
Yeah,
be able to help, and they appreciate somebody being
they
that
do. And
candid. And that's another thing of the insight and development is it's okay to let people know you're developing something. We should celebrate that, not hide it.
well, and I think people want to be given
Yes.
permission. I find that a lot, especially with my population, my ideal clients are these non-native English speakers who are in companies, and people are afraid to say something that might be considered inappropriate from a DE&I standpoint, for example, or they don't want to call out the difference. And yet these people are crying for
Hmm.
feedback. They really want the feedback. My one client always says, "Why don't they just correct me?" And I told her, it's like, well, it's not their job. And they may not even know how to correct you. And they're nervous about even saying they don't understand because it might get them in trouble. They might somehow feel that they're going to be called on
You're
the
right.
carpet for making that
Right.
remark, which is unfortunate, which is really unfortunate. Wow, that is really great information, Amy. I so appreciate that you shared it with us today. I actually am going to hit you up for a list of those four things you just talked about,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
think in my practice it would be really useful for me to think about those four parameters with my clients. That could be super interesting to add in. And also this idea of making it sort of mandatory that my clients find an internal
Yeah.
mentor,
Yeah.
somebody who's going to support them. So I really appreciate your sharing with us today. How can people reach you? Why don't you give us your contact information?
Sure. Sure. So it's my company is the Forehand Company, and my website is www.theforehandcompany.org. And I also am on LinkedIn if you search
Great.
either Amy Forehand or the Forehand Company. So
We can
I,
look. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. This is a little bit of a new area for me as far as interviewing people, and you've been a great introduction to that. So I appreciate that so much. Our audience today, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Confluence. If you enjoyed our conversation, give it a like and consider even subscribing to my channel. If you'd like help in improving your communication skills, you can bop over to boltglobal.com. There are several places on my website where you can book a 30-minute conversation call with me. We can do a little bit of an assessment of your communication style and figure out how I might be able to help you. Thanks so much, and ci vediamo la prossima volta. We'll see you next time.